Nintendo Switch has games. Anybody who's spent any amount of time with the console over the past 8 years knows this. And for the longest time, I've been eagerly awaiting the chance to put together the top 10 Nintendo Switch games ever. But as more and more games come out, and all of them good, it's very clear to me that I will not be able to rank them until the console is officially retired for good. So I thought about this, and I decided that in lieu of producing the top 10 Nintendo Switch games ever, I would talk about 10 games that I really, really like that I don't see myself putting on the top 10 Nintendo Switch games list, right? The top 10 hidden Nintendo Switch gems, I suppose. But there are countless games just like this on the eShop, right? There's countless games that have been produced over the years that are just as good, if not better than these, but these have been picked out because they're games that I feel like people don't really talk about, people don't really acknowledge, people don't respect, and people don't understand just how good they actually are. So, let me introduce you to 10 hidden gems on Nintendo Switch. First up, we have the action rhythm game Thumper. This title is a really unique roller coaster ride of music and action in which you have to control your little ship as it races along the track and as it navigates a bunch of difficult obstacles. The music's amazing, the visuals are trippy, and the action is intense all the way through. This is the defining example of everything an indie game should be. Nothing like this really exists, and this game looks so out there, it looks like it really shouldn't exist. But when you actually spend time playing it, when you spend time experiencing this, you realize that this is an absolute masterclass of game design in its chosen genre. This is absolutely something that should be considered one of the defining cult classics on Nintendo Switch. Unfortunately, I can't say a whole lot about 13 Sentinels without spoiling it. In fact, I recorded a bunch of gameplay footage that I can't show because giving away even a little bit of it kind of gives away this amazing, intricate sci-fi plot. What it essentially amounts to is 13 characters are utilizing mechs to fight a strange invasion on their city. That's all you really need to know. It is one of the most compelling sci-fi stories I've ever witnessed and deserves a lot more attention and respect. Out of all the games I decided to cover for this video, this is absolutely by far my favorite. I believe Alman Sight to be one of the hidden gems on Nintendo Switch, an absolute masterclass of unique mechanics, dark storytelling, and compelling characters that just wrap in and around themselves to create one of the most compelling, unique experiences I've played on the console. This is, to put it very simply, a dark fantasy murder mystery in which you, the Harbinger, a avatar of protecting all that's good and right in the world, have to investigate the murder of a high-profile priestess in this society. Her death spelt the end of the world, and you are tasked with living out the same day over and over and over again, investigating a final battle in the war between two distinct factions in an attempt to get to the bottom of the mystery and expose who's behind the death of this individual and to save the world from being destroyed because of it. This game is incredible. When you just look at just all the crazy mechanics they came up with, all the great character bits, the simple fact that you're kind of an avatar of goodness, something that's beyond mortal issues, is really interesting to me in this sense because you'll be fighting on both sides of the conflict as you expose and learn more about the characters, the world, and the setting. And it's a genuinely good mystery, full of twists and turns and revelations, And the game constantly surprises you with really shocking new mechanics, not the least of which, the game introduces you to this really unique system where you go along with one of the key characters in the plot and follow them through their day on their last day. When you advance far enough into the game, when you learn more about the plot, you can show them alternate futures or show them different perspectives. And this leads them down this path where they make radically different choices. And as a result of that, you're able to expose more and more of the plot. The game really is the closest I've ever come to experiencing something like The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. The idea of living out the same day over and over again is a really extremely appealing idea to me, but this game does not feel like a rehash of Majora's Mask at all. It feels like its own distinct thing, and remains one of my absolute favorite experiences on Nintendo Switch. I love it when games really surprise me with just simple game design. And when you really look at this next entry, when you look at Neon White, you see something that is essentially a pure video game. Something that doesn't waste its time with complex visuals or cinematics, and instead delivers just this insane creative experience that feels almost like playing a 90s anime. Again, the developers were apparently influenced by one of my all-time favorite games, Killer 7, so to me, that really speaks volumes of their good taste and their ability to create something just far beyond what most people are even capable of creating. This game is fast-paced, intense, and leaves you with this sense of just this thrill, this euphoria. And although there are certainly things that it could have done better. Most specifically, it could have had a better plot and maybe a couple more like things outside the main gameplay loop. But when you really look at this experience, what you're left with is an absolute gem of a game. Interesting to see gamers insist that developers don't put out interesting, innovative, unique titles like they used to in the 2000s, when in reality, games like this are coming out all the time. They just don't do well, and people tend to pretend they don't exist. In the case of Cereza and the Lost Demon, following hot on the heels of the highly successful Bayonetta 3, Platinum Games decided to produce a smaller budget spin-off title in the same universe in which a younger Bayonetta goes out on some adventure where she gets lost in the woods and has to deal with a number of aggressive fairies. This really calls back to classic fairy tales and children's media, most particularly something like Alice in Wonderland, while still having its own unique flavor and charm. It's shocking how much a game like this ties into the overall Bayonetta story, to the point where it really makes the series feel like one of the most fleshed out universes in gaming right now. This very well may be the last Bayonetta game we ever get, but for all intents and purposes, I'm very happy they went out on this one. This is a title that really demonstrates all of Platinum Games' unique strengths and really should be celebrated as a really stellar swan song. Okay, I've been thinking this for a long time, but this really needs to be said. The Blaster Master Zero Trilogy is by far the best remake trilogy over the past decade. These games are phenomenal. They innovate on the original title, they expand on the story, and they create a number of unique sequels. For those of you who don't understand what I'm talking about, the original Blaster Master Zero was essentially a remake of the original Blaster Master, but then they added in a bunch of new mechanics and features and story elements, and with the sequels, managed to expand on it and create entirely unique, insane games. that feel just like the NES Classic. This is one of the most underappreciated revivals I've seen over the past several years. And it's really disappointing to me that most people don't seem to have realized that these games exist and that they're as good as they are. These games are far better than the tripe that Square Enix is doing with Final Fantasy VII R, for example. This is a series that feels like it understands the appeal of the original Blaster Master. It understands the gameplay and the design and the general feel of the game. It plays just like the original, but when you see what they did with it, like all the bells and whistles they added, the new mechanics, the new story elements, like everything, it's just phenomenal. All three of these games are spectacular, all of them, and they really need to be thought of more as just these absolute stellar masterpieces. This is what a remake should be like. It's been several years since I actually played The Wonderful 101, but coming back to it after all this time, playing it on Switch, experiencing it again fresh for the first time ever, it really needs to be said that this specific game is absolutely one of the best games Nintendo has ever put out. It's the best action game. It's the best superhero story. It's this incredibly innovative, creative game that the market simply rejected because they were just too casual. This game was a defining example of just how far ahead Nintendo was of the rest of the industry in 2013. Something like this would never have been produced from other companies. And the cancellation of the director and developer, the follow-up to this, Scalebound from Microsoft Studios, only emphasizes that point. This is a game that exceeds where so many others fail. This is a game that is so wildly different and unique and hits every major mark it possibly needs to. This is a game that really understands how to be wild, creative, engaging, funny, and just wild and ridiculous. Right? To me, this is the greatest superhero thing ever produced. Even now, I think that just seeing just all these crazy bosses and characters going at it, all the unbelievable abilities of the Wonderful 101, you're left with this feeling that like this is a game that really is something special. And the fact that this game failed, and the fact that Platinum was never able to top it. It really just demonstrates just how much of a loss Platinum Games' decline has actually been for the industry. This is the defining example of what Platinum could have continued to produce if they had continued partnering with Nintendo, instead of going through this ridiculous Kickstarter route, trying to self-publish their products. They should have stuck with what they were good at and produced high-quality action games exclusively to Nintendo consoles. Again, I can't talk a lot about the house in Fata Morgana without giving away critical aspects of the plot, but let it be known that this is the best visual novel I've ever read. This game really excels at getting a lot of complex ideas across. It's dark. It has all these crazy plot twists. It's an incredibly memorable experience that I highly, highly recommend. In general, I do need to start reading more visual novels on Switch, but this was a really, really great starting point. This may not be exactly a hidden gem because if you were an early Switch owner like me, you no doubt heard of this game. It was one of the premier indie games that came out in April or May of 2017. This was an early indie game hit. And this kind of cemented the Switch's reputation for just being an indie game machine, because this was a high quality title from a studio that had never produced a game before, that really emphasized a unique gameplay style that really resonated with people. The idea that you're playing a platforming game where you don't jump, you slither. You are a snake making its way across these vast, creative, colorful environments with your hummingbird buddy trying to collect objects. And it's simplistic. There isn't any combat in the game. There's no enemies. There's nothing really except you and the control scheme. And the controls are complex. They offer There's a huge learning curve to them, but once you get the hang of them, you'll be slithering around these obstacles like a pro. And the snake is a really big one, too. So you have to position yourself and slither up and around objects and make your way across these levels. And collecting these things really, really demonstrates just how compelling this can be. This is a really good example of just what a video game should be. It is an interactive medium. This is not a game that feels like it should be as good as it is, but when you play it, when you start to learn it, you really start to understand that this really is a standout title on Nintendo Switch. Something that I will always look back on extremely fondly. Here we have the remake of Live Alive by Square Enix, a game that I know has done really well, that people are talking a lot about, but my opinion on this is that this is an extremely meaningful title that really should be studied, because this is a defining example of what AAA studios like Squaresoft were able to produce back in the 90s. This collection of miniature JRPGs experiments with a lot of different gameplay styles and narratives to create a extremely compelling experience unlike any other. The idea that you can be a kung fu master teaching your students, or that you could be a knight going through, his own trials and tribulations, that you could be a caveman trying to bang a cave girl, that you could be like, a robot in the distant future, that you can be a psychic teenager going through teenager problems. You're a delinquent in that one, or you could be like a character basically going through the Street Fighter circuit. Live Alive is just filled with incredibly inventive, funny, just charming 90s JRPG goodness. It does a wonderful job just kind of showcasing the creativity of these people, and it allows them to explore a lot of avenues that they wouldn't be able to explore in bigger projects. For example, the robot chapter doesn't feature any combat at all, which is really strange for a game like this. But if you think about it, the fact that they were able to pull that off and make it as interesting as they did really showcases just how special the game is. And the overarching plot, of course, is also extremely compelling. And I can't really spoil it, but when you just look at everything this game does, you really come away with this feeling that this is something truly special.